The summers in Japan are hot and humid. Today we have air conditioning and fans to deal with that, but in old Japan they had another method, and that was to tell ghost stories in order to chill the blood and let icy fingers run down the spine. One popular form of ghost stories was the Hyaku Monogatari Kaiden, which is 100 ghost stories. This was a type of game that was played where they would take 100 candles, and when they finished a story they would extinguish one candle, and so as the night wore on the room would grow darker and darker until they reached the final story and the final candle. It was said that originally this game, if you can call it that, was played by samurai as a test of their bravery. In the Edo period, from 17th century to the mid-19th century, it became more of a parlor game for the merchant class, and they would gather their friends together and set out 100 candles. It's a wonder they didn't burn down their place and all end up as ghosts. But then they would tell stories, traditional ghost stories, or strange stories that they had heard, or things that had happened to them or their friends. Now, you can imagine as the night wore on and one by one the candles were extinguished, the mood, the atmosphere would become one not of jovial nature, but would become more and more frightened. And as each candle went out, the guests would become more and more afraid. Some of them probably, no doubt, would find excuse to go home before they reach the end, or find some other excuse just to end the game. You can see, they believed that once they reached the final candle in the final story, that once that candle was extinguished, a ghost would appear. So in a way, this game was seen as a type of spiritual summoning that would bring a ghost at the end. There was reason why there was much fear the closer and closer they got to the end. Now, in one story that I heard, such a game was played at a temple. One of the practicing priests there, a temple novice, he decided to hold such a game, in summer of course, and invited several friends there. He placed the candles in a separate room to change it up a little bit, and whenever a participant told a story and finished it, they would have to go into this room by themselves and extinguish a candle. So as the night wore on and the room grew darker and darker, those people would have to go all alone into that ever-darkening room and extinguish a candle. Eventually they did reach the 100th story. The last candle was extinguished, but nothing happened. And all the guests, except for 2 guests, went home. The 2 guests and the novice settled down for the night in the temple and went to sleep. One of the guests woke up late in the night, and as he did, he saw something moving in the temple. That thing drew closer, and he realized it wasn't human. It came to the temple novice. It lifted him up quietly, bed and all, and took him outside of the temple. Then it came back and went to the other guest, the sleeping guest, lifted him up, his bed and all, and took him outside of the temple. The awoken guest was so frightened he couldn't move, and he kept waiting for the ghost to return for him. Eventually it dawned, and the guest fled the temple. The novice and the other guests were never seen again. The surviving guest, he made a point to go back to the temple and pray every day in order to avoid their same fate. Now, every day that he would go to this temple to make his prayers, he encountered a young and beautiful girl. Eventually, he started to strike up a conversation with her and began courting her. And after some time, he married her, and they became husband and wife and lived together for several years. And in that time, he neglected to go to the temple to make his prayers. By this time, he had forgotten now that he was happily married. But one night, as he and his wife were getting ready to bed, his wife bent over to blow out a candle, and in that moment, the man saw in her face the face of the ghost that he had seen in the temple. And then suddenly it struck him, this was the very anniversary of that night when they told those stories and the ghost later appeared. His wife looked up at him, and there was no mistake. It was that ghost. And the man realized all that time he had not gone and made his prayers, that doom had come to him. His wife rose up slowly and came towards him. The man was terrified. He couldn't move. The beautiful face that was once his wife disappeared and was replaced by that of a horrible ghost. And she reached out to him